So, consider this fictitious example that's inspired by real life. Say you're watching the news and you see a story about a new study on the cholesterol-lowering drug called Cholextra. The study says Cholextra is so effective that doctors should consider prescribing it to adults and even children who don't yet have high cholesterol. Is it too good to be true? You're smart, you decide to do some of your own research. You do a Google search, you consult social media, Facebook and Twitter, you look at Wikipedia, WebMD, a nonprofit website, and you read the original study in a peer-reviewed published medical journal. It all confirms how effective Cholextra is. You do run across a few negative comments and a potential link to cancer, but you dismiss that because medical experts call the cancer link a myth and say that those who think there is a link there are quacks and cranks and nuts. Finally, you learn that your own doctor recently attended a medical seminar. The lecture that he attended confirmed how effective Cholextra is, so he sends you off with some free samples and a prescription. You've really done your homework. But what if all isn't as it seems? What if the reality you found was false? A carefully constructed narrative by unseen special interests designed to manipulate your opinion. A Truman Show-esque alternate reality all around you. Complacency in the news media combined with incredibly powerful propaganda and publicity forces mean we sometimes get little of the truth. Special interests have unlimited time and money to figure out new ways to spin us while cloaking their role. Surreptitious astroturf methods are now more important to these interests than traditional lobbying of Congress. There's an entire industry built around it in Washington. What is astroturf? It's a perversion of grassroots, as in fake grassroots. AstroTurf is when political, corporate, or other special interests disguise themselves and publish blogs, start Facebook and Twitter accounts, publish ads, letters to the editor, or simply post comments online to try to fool you into thinking an independent or grassroots movement is speaking. The whole point of AstroTurf is to try to give the impression there's widespread support for or against an agenda when there's not. AstroTurf seeks to manipulate you into changing your opinion by making you feel as if you're an outlier when you're not. One example is the Washington Redskins name. Without taking a position on the controversy, if you simply were looking at news media coverage over the course of the past year or looking at social media, you'd probably have to conclude that most Americans find that name offensive and think it ought to be changed. But what if I told you 71% of Americans say the name should not be changed? That's more than 2/3. AstroTurfers seek to controversialize those who disagree with them. They attack news organizations that publish stories they don't like, whistleblowers who tell the truth, politicians who dare to ask the tough questions, and journalists who have the audacity to report on all of it. Sometimes AstroTurfers simply shove intentionally so much confusing and conflicting information into the mix that you're left to throw up your hands and disregard all of it, including the truth. Drown out a link between a medicine and a harmful side effect, say vaccines and autism, by throwing a bunch of conflicting paid-for studies, surveys, and experts into the mix, confusing the truth beyond recognition. And then there's Wikipedia. AstroTurf's dream come true. Billed as the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit, the reality can't be more different. Anonymous Wikipedia editors control and co-opt pages on behalf of special interests. They forbid and reverse edits that go against their agenda. They skew and delete information in blatant violation of Wikipedia's own established policies with impunity, always superior to the poor schlubs who actually believe anyone can edit Wikipedia, only to discover they're barred from correcting even the simplest factual inaccuracies. Try adding a footnoted fact or correcting a fact error on one of these monitored Wikipedia pages and poof, sometimes within a matter of seconds you'll find your edit is reversed. In 2012, famed author Philip Roth tried to correct a major fact error about the inspiration behind one of his book characters cited on a Wikipedia page. But no matter how hard he tried, Wikipedia's editors wouldn't allow it. They kept reverting the edits back to the false information. When Roth finally reached a person at Wikipedia, which was no easy task, and tried to find out what was going wrong, they told him he simply was not considered a credible source on himself. A few weeks later, there was a huge scandal when Wikipedia officials got caught offering a PR service that skewed and edited information on behalf of paid, publicity-seeking clients in utter opposition to Wikipedia's supposed policies. All of this may be why, when a medical study looked at medical conditions described on Wikipedia pages and compared it to actual peer-reviewed published research, Wikipedia contradicted medical research 90% of the time. You may never fully trust what you read on Wikipedia again, nor should you. Let's now go back to that fictitious Colextra example and all the research you did. It turns out the Facebook and Twitter accounts you found that were so positive were actually written by paid professionals hired by the drug company to promote the drug. The Wikipedia page had been monitored by an agenda editor also paid by the drug company. The drug company also arranged to optimize Google search engine results, so it was no accident that you stumbled across that positive nonprofit that had all those positive comments. The nonprofit was, of course, secretly founded and funded by the drug company. The drug company also financed that positive study and used its power of editorial control to omit any mention of cancer as a possible side effect. Once more, each and every doctor who publicly touted Colextra, or called the cancer link a myth, or ridiculed critics as paranoid cranks and quacks, or served on a government advisory board that approved the drug, each of those doctors is actually a paid consultant for the drug company. As for your own doctor, the medical lecture he attended that had all those positive evaluations was, in fact, like many continuing medical education classes, sponsored by the drug company. And when the news reported on that positive study, it didn't mention any of that. I have tons of personal examples from real life. A couple of years ago, CBS News asked me to look into a story about a study coming out from the nonprofit National Sleep Foundation. Supposedly, this press release coming out said, the study concluded we are a nation with an epidemic of sleeplessness and we don't even know it, and we should all go ask our doctors about it. A couple of things struck me about that. First, I recognized the phrase, ask your doctor, as a catchphrase promoted by the pharmaceutical industry. They know that if they can get your foot through the door of the doctor's office to mention a malady, you're very likely to be prescribed the latest drug that's marketed. Second, I wondered how serious an epidemic of sleeplessness could really be if we don't even know that we have it. Right? It didn't take long for me to do a little research and discover that the National Sleep Foundation nonprofit and this study, which was actually a survey, not a study, were sponsored in part by a new drug that was about to be launched onto the market called Lunesta, a sleeping pill. I reported the study as CBS News asked, but of course I disclosed the sponsorship behind the nonprofit and the survey so that viewers could weigh the information accordingly. All the other news media reported the same survey directly off the press release as written without digging past the superficial. It later became an example written up in the Columbia Journalism Review, which quite accurately reported that only we at CBS News had bothered to do a little bit of research and disclose the conflict of interest behind this widely reported survey. So now you may be thinking, what can I do? I thought I'd done my research. What chance do I have separating fact from fiction, especially if seasoned journalists with years of experience can be so easily fooled? Well, I have a few strategies that I can tell you about to help you recognize signs of propaganda and astroturf. Once you start to know what to look for, you'll begin to recognize it everywhere. First, hallmarks of astroturf include use of inflammatory language such as crank, quack, nutty, lies, paranoid, pseudo, and conspiracy. Astroturfers often claim to debunk myths that aren't myths at all. Use of the charged language tests well. People hear something's a myth, maybe they find it on Snopes, and they instantly declare themselves too smart to fall for it. But what if the whole notion of the myth is itself a myth, and you and Snopes fell for that? Beware when interests attack an issue by controversializing or attacking the people, personalities, and organizations surrounding it rather than addressing the facts. That could be astroturf. And most of all, astroturfists tend to reserve all of their public skepticism for those exposing wrongdoing rather than the wrongdoers. In other words, instead of questioning authority, they question those who question authority. You might start to see things a little more clearly. It's kind of like taking off your glasses and wiping them and putting them back on and realizing for the first time how foggy they've been all along. I can't resolve these issues, but I hope that I've given you some information that will at least motivate you to take off your glasses and wipe them and become a wiser consumer of information in an increasingly artificial, paid-for reality. Thank you.
So is it okay to have the government monitor social media conversations and then to wade in and correct some of those conversations? With more on this, let's go to technology expert Carmi Levy. He's on the line from Montreal. Carmi, do you think the government's monitoring what you and I are saying right now? Is this whole thing getting out of line or what?
I'm going to wonder every time I post online, is someone from the federal government watching what I'm saying?
Right.
Do I have to change the temper or the tone of my argument simply because I worry that I'm being watched? It is a little bit scary. We've been talking about this risk, this online risk for so long. Now that the government is wading into it, I think it needs to be very conscious of the potential for those fears to come true.
So you do foresee, people who are engaged in, maybe a political conversation online in some sort of social forum, that there's going to be an element of fear, and that eventually it could change what people do say on the internet if it's political in nature?
Exactly,
Yeah.
because if you're stuck wondering who's watching and what are they going to do if I say the quote-unquote wrong thing, you're going to necessarily change the way you involve yourself.
Wire.com has uncovered a 2006 study written for the U.S. Special Operations Command that suggests the military should clandestinely recruit or hire prominent bloggers. The report stated, quote, hiring a block of bloggers to verbally attack a specific person or promote a specific message may be worth considering. The report also suggested the Pentagon hack blogs that promote messages that are antithetical to U.S. interests. The report stated, quote, hacking the site and subtly changing the messages and data merely a few words or phrases may be sufficient to begin destroying the blogger's credibility with the audience.
The average American would be so shocked to find out there's something called COINTELPRO, the FBI's covert action programs against American citizens. Now, this Senate report tells what the FBI was doing against the American citizens, literally. Here's their statement. COINTELPRO began in 1956, in part because of the frustration with the Supreme Court rulings limiting the government's power to proceed overtly against dissident groups. It ended in 1971 with the threat of public exposure. The Bureau conducted, their terms, a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association.
COINTELPRO, where they had targeted thousands and thousands of people for investigation based on no violation of the law, just hunches and suspicions, where they were tracking down Martin Luther King, who had committed no crimes, but they were tapping him, they were covering him, and they were on his case all the time, and they were trying to dismantle him as a leader of the civil rights movement. But the fact that this could happen in America, this nation of law and accountability, and happen over so many years. Presidents of both political parties were involved in this. It was a bipartisan thing, and there was a lot of this that the agencies had to explain that were the result, directly or indirectly, of pressure from above. Yes, we were surprised.
The FBI set out to neutralize the Black Panther Party any way they could.
COINTELPRO was doing its mischief in attempting to pit the two organizations against each other. It got to the points where there was clearly almost a state of war that was existing between the two organizations.
The FBI had created this tension. They had these two groups that, when they saw each other on the street, it was just a natural confrontation.
Correspondence propaganda between the two, telling one that the other one was doing something that wasn't appropriate.
Well, I felt pretty bad because most of it was really crap. It was a waste of time. We destroyed a lot of lives, and I always deny that, but
police department had infiltrated the Panther 21, and the highly publicized, highly touted trial of 21 members of the Panther Party for allegedly plotting to blow up department stores turned out to be a total hype, entire harassment, entrapment by the FBI, where it was revealed that FBI agents had infiltrated the Panthers, and the people behind any ideas of a plot to blow up anything were all government agents.
It's been revealed that incendiary blogger and radio host Hal Turner was an FBI informant and agent provocateur. Turner is being charged with making death threats against Connecticut legislators and Illinois judges, and he has to claim that his actions were legal because he did the same when employed by the FBI. Prosecutors have acknowledged that Turner was an informant who spied on radical right-wing organizations. But Turner went much further than spying. He also called for former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney to be lynched. McKinney responded to the news saying, quote, "It has just now come to my attention that a journalist who suggested that I be lynched was actually being paid by our own government to say that. Now, when I reported it to the FBI, how in the world was I to know that he was at that time on the FBI?
All right, to Tel Aviv now. As cash-strapped Israeli students have found a new way to relieve their financial plight. They can get easy money by simply posting positive tweets for the government and clicking the like button. It's after authorities came up with the idea of offering youngsters salaries and even scholarships for protection of the government's interests in fighting anti-Semitism on the web. Ironically, though, the father of the digital diplomacy program has come under fire for posting racist comments, the very thing he was meant to be combating. Paula Sleer takes up the story.
Public opinion against Israel is at an all-time low. Recent wars with Gaza and the seemingly never-ending occupation have left the country waging a PR war.
This is a very massive wave of this false propaganda and attempts to legitimize, our right to defend ourselves and even our right to live in our historic land. So we have to do everything to tell the truth.
For 65 years, Israeli diplomats have struggled in their posts. In the modern world, they need all the help they can get. Enter the undergrads. The idea is to pay students to tweet pro-Israeli propaganda. Lidor Bar David has been doing it for a while, but as a volunteer.
It's another way to a student to give back to society. Even in Israel, you have a bunch of people, a few people at the Foreign Affairs Ministry office who do social media for their living. So it's okay for people to getting a salary on this kind of work.
The new student sales force will share a PR commission pot of nearly $1 million. And in universities across the country, they'll eventually even receive scholarships for waging Israel's digital diplomacy. But before these new recruits could even start tweeting, liking, or hashtagging, there was a PR blunder. The guy tapped to head the social media advocacy has already been put to pasture. Take a look at his Facebook page. Daniel Seaman is known for being abrasive to the foreign media, but that's not all. Seaman called Palestinians stupid in an expletive-laden rant. Critics pounced, taking the opportunity to question the basic ethics of the new approach.
So you're basically turning a human being into a human commercial.
Uri Agnon is a second-year philosophy student who says he won't be signing up. He's angry with his government trying to tell him what to think.
Instead of trying to make Israel a good democracy, for instance, giving out scholarships for people that will try to make this place a better place, he gives out scholarships for people to say that it's a good place. I mean, if this was such a good place, then these people would tell it anyway.
You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. When people have to make decisions, they act to the best of their ability based on the information available. But sometimes that information may be inaccurate, which doesn't stop it from spreading from one person to the next. This unintentional spread is known as misinformation. Throughout history, misinformation is regrettably common. Before the existence of reliable, fast communication across long distances, news could take weeks or months to reach world leaders. What they did here was often exaggerated or incorrect. Even today, when a world leader, corporation, or the media unintentionally spreads incorrect information about a nuclear weapon perhaps, or an imminent war, fear can overpower otherwise rational people. In the military, this uncertainty is known as the fog of war. No one is perfect, and no one is immune. Fortunately, communication in the modern world is cheaper than at any other time in history. With the ability to check facts with people across the planet, it seems these errors are a thing of the past. Unless, of course, they are intentionally spread. Here's where it gets crazy. Think of misinformation as a bungle on the football field. Think of disinformation as a well-executed play. It could take the form of a forged letter, an extraordinarily lucky discovery, or an anonymous phone call. When it comes to information warfare, disinformation is one of the oldest techniques in the business. During World War II, British forces intentionally leaked fake campaign plans to Axis powers in Operation Barclay, diverting Nazi attention from Sicily. Disinformation was spread by the Soviets and the US as they competed to become the world's reigning superpower, perhaps most notably in the CIA's Operation Mockingbird. Yet disinformation is not a discarded Cold War practice, nor is it a thing of the past. In countries like Zimbabwe, Myanmar, or Belarus, the public generally accepts that elections are rigged, but the local media rarely contradicts the ruling powers. It's no secret that many U.S. citizens believe presidents from Lyndon Johnson to George W. Bush and Barack Obama have resorted to disinformation to nudge public opinion. Some experts believe the public has become more disinformed than ever before. In a 1996 study on information warfare, the RAND Corporation found that opportunities for perception management, or affecting the way the public interprets information, have expanded rather than decreased. From the internet to Photoshop, the evolution of information technology has provided a wealth of new tools for those who would shape public perception. But here's the tricky part. How can we tell the truth from the propaganda? In the conspiracy world, this is a matter of hot debate. Alex Jones, David Icke, and numerous other conspiracy theorists have themselves been accused of being disinfo agents, planted by a government or shadowy world power to manage the public's opinion. These examples run high on emotion and low on proof, but the point remains disturbing. From the Gulf of Tonkin controversy to state-owned media such as North Korea's Central News Agency, it's easy to find examples of disinformation, but there's often no sure way to know which stories are true and which sources to trust. According to some conspiracy theorists, anyone could be a source of disinformation. Even us.
One of the critical questions to ask when reading a medical journal article is, who funded the study? In most journals, researchers are required to identify their sources of funding, so what's the problem? Well, researchers can obscure the true origin of financial support. They can hide it, disguise it, or even launder the money through a front group. Case in point, a study downplaying the risks of lung cancer, funded in part by the Foundation for Lung Cancer Early Detection, Prevention, and Treatment. That doesn't sound so bad until you realize it's underwritten by millions from a tobacco company. See, there's no obligation to disclose a funding source of funding. This allows companies to evade financial disclosure requirements and make it harder to follow the money trail. Why does the funding source matter? Every single one of 8 reviews covering over 1,000 studies found that research funded by industry is more likely to make conclusions that are favorable to industry. For example, why do some review articles on the health effects of secondhand smoke reach different conclusions than others? The only factor was whether an author was affiliated with the tobacco industry. This is a disturbing finding. It suggests that far from conflict of interest being unimportant in the objective and pure world of science, it may be the main factor determining the result of many studies. Not that you'd know, because 77% of authors failed to disclose the sources of funding. And that's another problem. The responsibility to disclose funding sources is left entirely up to the authors. So, how many researchers divulged the truth? Evidently, a law was passed in Denmark requiring physicians to register anytime they worked with industry, which allowed researchers to cross-reference the studies they published to see how honest they were, and 48% of the time, the conflicts of interest were not disclosed, reinforcing the perception that physicians simply don't take conflict of interest seriously, or at least Danish physicians. What about the US? We didn't know until this study was published. Historically, there's been no means of confirmation or verification when an American doctor said they had no conflicts of interest. But then, in 2007, hip and knee replacement companies were forced to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines for giving orthopedic surgeons illegal kickbacks. Many orthopedic surgeons made decisions predicated on how much money they could make, choosing which device to implant by going to the highest bidder. We expect doctors to make decisions based on what's in the best interest of their patients, said the Department of Justice, not the best interests of their bank accounts. And part of the settlement was that they would have to make public all the payments they made to physicians. The release of those records offered a rare opportunity to see if physicians were telling the truth on disclosure forms, and lo and behold, more than half of payments were not disclosed, totaling millions of dollars. Now, this was for surgeons and medical device companies. What about doctors and drug companies? The same thing happened where drug companies were forced to disclose who they were paying off. They looked at the publications of the doctors that got the most money, at least $100,000, and they were worse than the surgeons. In 69% of the cases, they failed to disclose their industry ties. The problem is that we just assume researchers are going to be honest and tell the truth. But these findings suggest that the accuracy and completeness of conflict of interest disclosures cannot be assumed. So even when a paper says no conflict of interest, who knows if it's really true? Longtime editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine wrote a scathing piece on drug companies and doctors who failed to disclose hundreds of thousands of dollars from drug companies like GlaxoSmithKline, which had been fined literally billions of dollars for things like bribes and suppressing data. When they got results that were commercially unacceptable, they just buried them. billions in fines, but for drug companies that may just be the cost of doing business. As reprehensible as many drug industry practices are, the medical profession may be even more culpable. I mean, you expect drug companies to prioritize the bottom line, but maybe we should expect more from the healing profession. Who funds most of the studies that show that drugs are safe and effective? The drug companies themselves. It's self-evidently absurd to look to investor-owned companies for unbiased evaluations of their own products. One result of the bias in the medical literature is then that physicians learn to practice a very drug-intensive style of medicine. Even when lifestyle changes would be more effective, physicians and their patients often believe that for every ailment, there's a drug. It's gotten so bad that physicians can no longer rely on the medical literature for valid and reliable information. Wow, that's quite an accusation. Says who? Says a longtime editor of one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. To help expose some of these conflicts of interest that are corrupting the medical profession, the Drug Company Gift Disclosure Act was introduced into Congress and died there year after year until it was successfully integrated into the Affordable Care Act. And now there's a database detailing which doctors get the billions of dollars dished out, permitting patients to make better informed decisions when choosing healthcare professionals and making treatment decisions. I described how you could look up your own doctor. The 2008 version that medical groups endorsed didn't require public disclosure unless doctors got $500 in gifts. But the 2009 version got even stricter, requiring disclosure if you even pocketed $100, leading groups like the American Academy of Family Physicians to start to get a little nervous. But the final wording in Obamacare requires disclosure of even a $10 meal, leading countries around the world to look to the United States of America for leadership in healthcare ethics. You don't see that every day. Now that we have this massive public record, we can now really see how honest doctors have been. The financial disclosures by the authors of the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association guidelines were matched to the public disclosures of the hundreds of thousands of dollars they receive from Big Pharma thanks to the new law. And let's just say the overall agreement between author and drug company disclosure was poor. Nationally, female physicians each received thousands fewer dollars on average each year from drug companies, though it's not clear if that's because the women were ethical or the industry was sexist. What about conflicts of interest online? There are purportedly evidence-based medicine websites allowing physicians to answer clinical questions at the bedside. For example, a clinician caring for patients are increasingly reviewing treatment recommendations on these websites to make clinical decisions in real time. You're with a patient, you can just whip out your phone and check. So it's important that there are no financial conflicts of interest in those that write these online guidelines. So they examined one such website called UpToDate, which seemed to provide the most comprehensive diagnosis. So, did they find any conflicts of interest? Yes, in every single one they looked at. Okay, but so what do you do with that information? Let's say you see an article claiming that candy consumption is not associated with health risks, and they disclosed that the research was supported by the National Confectioners Association, who used to run ads that said things like, put candy in their school lunch because it's good for them. The problem with financial conflicts of interest is you simply don't know what to believe. So, maybe this preoccupation with disclosure hijacked the whole debate. Maybe, as the former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine critiqued, the focus should be instead on not just disclosing, but eliminating commercial conflicts. It's like campaign finance reform, where the issue is managed more by public disclosure rather than getting money out of politics. Dr. Kassirer writes that the vast attention paid to failure to disclose conflicts of interest is misplaced, and that more attention should be focused on the financial conflicts themselves. After Dr. Kassirer effectively resigned from the New England Journal of Medicine, disillusioned with the direction they were taking, Dr. Angel took over, the first female editor-in-chief in the journal's 100-year history. She lasted about a year. Medical journals consistently refer to potential conflicts of interest, she wrote, as though they were different from the real thing, and about disclosing and managing them, not about prohibiting them. In short, there seems to be a desire to eliminate the smell of corruption while keeping the money. Breaking the dependence of the medical profession on the pharmaceutical industry will take more than appointing committees. It will take a sharp break from an extremely lucrative pattern of behavior. For decades, on the basis of concerns from the American Heart Association and consumer groups, the Federal Trade Commission carried out successful legal action upheld by the Supreme Court to compel the egg industry to cease and desist from false and misleading advertising that eggs had no harmful effects on health. See, anti-cholesterol attacks on eggs resulted in severe economic loss through a reduction in egg consumption, so the egg industry created a National Commission on Egg Nutrition to combat the anti-cholesterol, anti-egg publicity with ads like this, exclaiming there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that eating eggs in any way increases the risk of heart attack, which the U.S. Court of Appeals found patently false and misleading. Even the tobacco industry wasn't that brazen, instead just trying to introduce the element of doubt, arguing that the relationship between smoking and health remained an open question. The egg ads made 7 claims, each of which, in truth and in fact, was determined to be bull. The court determined the egg industry ads were, and are, false, misleading, deceptive. In fact, legal scholars view what the tobacco industry tried to do as the same as what the American Egg Board's Nutrition Commission on Egg Nutrition tried to do. As with the egg ads, the tobacco industry did more than just espouse one side of a genuine controversy, but just denied the existence of scientific evidence. Over the last 36 years, the American Egg Board has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to convince people eggs are not going to kill them, and it's working. In combination with aggressive nutritional science and public relations efforts, research shows that the advertising has been effective in decreasing consumers' concerns over eggs and cholesterol heart health. This is from their internal strategy documents I got a hold of. Currently, they're targeting moms. Their approach is to surround moms wherever they are. They pay integration fees for egg product placement in TV shows. To integrate eggs into The Biggest Loser, for example, could be $1 million. But getting some kids' storytime reading program to integrate eggs may only take $500,000 though. The American Egg Board keeps track of who is and is not a friend of eggs. They pay scientists $1,500 to sit and answer questions like, what studies can help disassociate eggs from cardiovascular disease? From the beginning, their arch nemesis was the American Heart Association, over which they fought a major battle over cholesterol. In documents retrieved through the Freedom of Information Act, we see even the USDA repeatedly chastising the egg industry for misrepresenting the American Heart Association position. In a draft letter to magazine editors, the egg industry tried to say that the American Heart Association changed its recommendations to approve an egg a day in 2000 and eventually eliminated its number of restrictions on eggs in 2002. To which the head of USDA's Poultry Research and Promotion Programs had to explain the quote-unquote change in 2000 wasn't a change at all. Nothing in the guidelines or recommendations was changed. What happened is that in response to a question posed by someone planted in the audience, Heart Association reps acknowledged that even though eggs are the most concentrated source of cholesterol in the diet, since an individual egg has less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol, technically an egg could fit under the 300 milligram daily limit. And in 2002, they just eliminated the specific mention of eggs for consistency's sake. But the American Heart Association insists that they haven't changed their position and continue to warn consumers about eggs. Here's from the AHA website at the time. If one egg has 213, and the limit dietary cholesterol intake for people with normal cholesterol is 300, you could fit in an egg if you cut down on all other animal products. Right? You can have an egg for breakfast, and then if you had some coffee, some skinless turkey breast, etc., you could end up 510, right? Nearly twice the recommended limit. So if you're going to eat an egg, you need to substitute vegetables for some of the meat, you drink your coffee black, and watch for hidden eggs in baked goods. And the limit for folks with high cholesterol is 200 milligrams a day, which may not even allow a single egg a day. This is how the Senior Director of Nutrition Education at the American Egg Board's Egg Nutrition Center characterized the American Heart Association guidelines. Maybe I'm being overly sensitive, but this reads like, if you insist on having those deadly high cholesterol eggs, your penalty will be to eat vegetables. And you can't even have that yummy steak and creamy coffee you love. Really, it's not worth eating eggs. Oh, and if you think you'll be able to enjoy some delicious baked goods, forget it. The deadly eggs are there too. The American Egg Board is a promotional marketing board appointed by the U.S. government, whose mission is to increase demand for egg and egg products on behalf of U.S. egg producers. Now, if an individual egg company wants to run an ad campaign, they can say whatever they want. But if an egg corporation wants to dip into the $10 million the American Egg Board sets aside for advertising, because the board is overseen by the federal government, corporations are not allowed to lie with those funds. What a concept. Which leads to quite revealing exchanges between egg corporations that want to use that money and USDA on what egg companies can and cannot say about eggs. Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, I was able to get my hands on some of those emails. Of course, a lot of what I got looked like this. Please note a number of items about our Salmonella Crisis module. Any questions? Or even better, entire sheets of paper that literally just said this. That was the whole sheet of paper. Our tax dollars hard at work. But check this out. This is some egg company trying to put out a brochure on healthy snacking for kids. But because of existing laws against false and misleading advertising, the head of USDA's Poultry Research and Promotion Programs reminds them that you can't couch eggs or egg products as being healthy or nutritious. See, the words nutritious and healthy carry certain connotations. You know that food is actually good for you. But because eggs have the amount of cholesterol they do, plus all the saturated fat, the words healthy and nutritious are problematic when it comes to eggs. This is the USDA saying this. However, the USDA helpfully suggests you can say eggs are nutrient dense. Wait a second, why can you say eggs are nutrient dense but not nutritious? Because there's no legal definition of nutrient dense. You can say Twinkies and Coca-Cola are nutrient dense, but legally, you can't say something is nutritious unless it's actually nutritious. So, for example, the egg industry wanted to run this ad calling eggs a nutritional powerhouse that aids in weight loss. The USDA had to remind the industry you can't portray eggs as a diet food because of the fat and cholesterol content. In fact, they're nearly twice the calories of anything that can be called low calorie. Nutritional powerhouse can't be used either. Fine, the industry said, they'll move to Plan B. Headline the ad, Exceptional Nutrition. Nope. Because again, given the saturated fat and cholesterol, you can't legally call eggs nutritious. So the ad ended up find true satisfaction, and instead of weight loss, they had to go with can reduce hunger. USDA congratulated them on their cleverness. Yes, a food that when eaten can reduce hunger. What a concept. You can't even call eggs a food relatively low in calories. Can't say eggs are low in saturated fat. They're not. Can't say they're relatively low in fat. Can't even call them a rich source of protein because they're not. It's illegal to advertise that eggs pack a nutritional wallop. Can't truthfully say that. Or have a high nutritional content. You can't say eggs are nutritious at all. Can't say nutritious. Cannot say eggs are nutritious. Sometimes you have to tell the industry a few times. Eggs have so much cholesterol you can't even say they contribute nutritionally. Can't say eggs are healthful. Certainly can't say they're healthy. Have you seen how much cholesterol there are in those things? Can't say healthy. Can't even say eggs contribute healthful components. Since you can't say eggs are a healthy start to the day, the USDA suggests satisfying start. Can't call eggs a healthful ingredient, but you can call eggs a recognizable ingredient. Can't truthfully say eggs are good for you. Can't say they're good for you by law. The egg industry needs to steer clear of words like healthy or nutritious. For food to be labeled healthy under FDA rules, it has to be low in saturated fat. Eggs fail that test. And less than 90 milligrams of cholesterol per serving. Even half an egg fails that criteria. For the same reason you can't tout ice cream for healthy bones, you can't say eggs are healthy because they exceed the limit for cholesterol. Egg corporations aren't even allowed to say things like eggs are an important part of a well-balanced, healthy diet on an egg carton because it would be considered misleading, according to the USDA's National Egg Supervisor, since eggs contain significant amounts of fat and cholesterol, and therefore contribute to the leading killer in the United States, heart disease. The industry can't afford to tell the truth about eggs or even the hens that lay them. The industry crams 5 to 10 birds in cages the size of a file cabinet their whole lives, but when providing footage to the media, the American Egg Board instructs, do not show multiple birds in cages. They look too crowded and open us up to activist criticism. In other words, do not show the truth. Not only is the industry barred from saying eggs are healthy, they can't even refer to eggs as safe. All references to safety must be removed because more than 100,000 Americans are salmonella poisoned every year from eggs. The Egg Board response to this egg-borne epidemic is that salmonella is a naturally occurring bacteria. The egg industry didn't think that should necessarily be the key message, fearing it may be counterproductive by implying there's no avoiding salmonella in eggs aside from avoiding eggs altogether. That's why the American Egg Board can't even mention anything but eggs cooked hard and dry. No soft boiled, no over easy, no sunny side up, because of salmonella. The American Egg Board's own research showed that the sunny side up cooking method should be considered unsafe. And because of avian influenza as well, not just salmonella, in light of bird flu viruses, eggs must be cooked firm. The VP of marketing for the Egg Board complained to the USDA, saying they'd really like to not have to dictate that yolks are firm. What about some Washington Post article saying running yolks may be safe for everyone except pregnant women, infants, elderly, or those with chronic disease? Turns out that was a misquote. They can't be considered safe for anyone. Instead of safe, you can call eggs fresh, the USDA Marketing Service helpfully suggests, but you can't call eggs safe. You cannot say eggs are safe to eat, can't say they're safe, can't even mention safety, can't say they're healthful. All references to healthfulness must be deleted as well. wait a second. Eggs can't really be called healthy? Eggs can't even really be called safe? Says who? Says the United States Department of Agriculture. Why is the salt industry so powerful? They have their own PR and lobbying firms to play tobacco industry-style tactics to downplay the dangers. But salt is so cheap. I mean, how much money are they really making? It's not the salt mine barons. It's the processed food industry. Just like the sugar industry could care less if we buy a 2-pound bag at the store, it's the trillion-dollar processed food industry that uses the dirt-cheap added salt and sugar to sell us their junk. And by hooking us on hyper-sweet, hyper-salty foods, our taste buds get so dampened down that natural foods taste like cardboard. And the ripest fruit may not be as sweet as Fruit Loops, so we just continue to buy more and more. But there are two other major reasons the food industry adds salt to food. The other two reasons, entirely commercial, and for most foods are the real reason the food industry wants the intake of salt to remain high. If you add salt to meat, it draws in water, so you can increase the weight by like 20%. And since it's sold by the pound, that's 20% more profits for very little cost. Salt also makes us thirsty. Bars offer free salted peanuts for a reason. Soda companies own snack companies for a reason. It's not just a coincidence that Pepsi and Frito-Lay are the same company. Would we shell out $9 for a drink at the movies after eating a bucket of unsalted popcorn? Would we supersize our soda if they didn't salt our fries and Big Mac? But that's not the only reason salt is added to meat. It solubilizes the muscle proteins to a gel for optimum meat texture. That's one of the reasons the meat and fish industries like the so-called meat glue enzyme, transglutaminase. Meat glue can help gel the muscle protein without adding salt. But some of these salt alternatives leave a bitter aftertaste in the meat, but this problem can be managed by also adding a bitter-blocking chemical to the meat, which work by blocking the activation of our taste receptors, preventing that information from ever reaching our brain. The meat industry acknowledges that their products contribute a significant amount of dietary sodium, maligning their image, but salt is just so cheap that using anything else would cost them money. However, if they're able to resolve this cost issue, if they can make it cost-effective, then one day maybe they could end up saving millions of lives as well as dollars.
Things that may or may not be true. Things that man needs to believe in the most. That people are basically good. That honor, courage, and virtue mean everything. That power and money and power mean nothing. That good always triumphs over evil.